I felt like, thank you. I felt like I just followed a most incredible musical group. Like we started with Sonny Rollins. Anybody know who Sonny Rollins is? Okay. And then I got John Coltrane next. So, and then I looked at the time and I realized what I heard about Miles Davis say once. You know, they were playing I think they were playing in the Village. And Coltrane, who was noted for taking long courses, very, very long courses. And Miles was sitting on the side, he kept blowing in his mouthpiece and went, 20 minutes went by and Coltrane was still doing his thing. So finally John came down off, he says, "I'm sorry, Miles, baby, I'm sorry." Miles says, "Just take your horn out your mouth." Well, I'll try to do that today. So make me take my horn out of my mouth, okay? We have a person. The thing I love about Barbara is that she really does believe we should take the tools of our scholarship to save our species. The ultimate value, to me, that crosses all religions and all cultures is the survival of our species. And that is in danger. It is in danger because of the kinds of issues that Barbara talked about. Well, I'm basically a scientist of teaching and learning. And so what can I do to help contribute to a solution for the problem? The problem is poverty. It's gut-wrenching poverty. Our only way to begin to nibble at poverty is not just equity in education. That's unnecessary. It is not sufficient. We have to have super effective education. And we've talked about this for decades. And for 27 years, we've developed the science of teaching. And I want to tell you a little bit about it. It's just one little model across about 10 schools in the USA and England and Ireland. And so I want to tell you about it. And I'm proud to show some data about how we did bridge the gap, but didn't in some ways. If I can find this. Okay. So what effective education means, this is a slide I added to the one, I did this in India last. They have the same problem, but they just have 4 billion people. Poverty is the source for health, incarceration, unemployment, and etc. It's responsible for the 1 in 100 people in the U.S. that are in prison. It's a necessary, if not sufficient, step to accelerate the learning of all children and bridge the gap as well as make the bridge higher. We can't just bridge the gap. When I go to India, and I go in the private schools in India, and there are 40 kids in the classroom on point, all well above grade level. And they're just now beginning to get the kind of technology we can do with teaching as a science. Effective schools are the sources of community. For many years we've had a preschool in Yonkers, and it's a source of community. It brings together people because we teach scientific procedures for raising parents. For parents raising children. And those are necessary. It's necessary to cross that generational gap. We're talking about, in many cases, education across generations. We're talking about grandmothers, grandfathers, and children. How do you bring that together? For health, for many, many reasons. There is a science of teaching and learning. It's not a cognitive science, it's a real science of behavior. I'm going to tell you about it. And from my point of view, I take the position and the proposition that science tells us what works in a given endeavor. It is clear that there is now both a science of teaching and learning. What works? If it doesn't work, get rid of it. We don't need to still talk about Freud 20 years after there's no evidence that any of this works. Bury the dead stuff. We got too many other things to teach. I'm going to take about a 27-year record of applying the ever-growing components of the science in a few model research and demonstration centers. The basic science consists of these parts. It consists of the basic principles of behavior. And these basic principles of behavior have been growing and have been around since about 1938. One of them, the most important, was found in the basement of in the basement of Main Hall, which is now called Zankel Hall. It's called the Law of Effect. The basic principles of learning and the basic principles of teaching. Those are all a little bit different. Also, there are over 200 tactics. Think of this as over 200 kinds of medication from the applied research that can be used by people who know when to use it, for whom, and under what kinds of conditions. So that already tells you about the differences in what you have to learn. So I want to talk about the categories of the application of this science. One is how to ensure that you have attentive students and effective performance by students and professionals. Wow, if you could do that in the Board of Education in New York City, you know, it would change everything. And yes, we can. And yes, we could. It would require major operations, but we already know how to do that. That's a piece of cake. That's not the problem. First, you have to have their attention. Just get it. We know how to do that. The next thing is how to teach children to do what they could not do before. You know, that doesn't mean you give them 2 weeks of reading, and if they can't do it, say, well, he made it and he didn't. If you taught kids to ride a bicycle like that, you give them one kid 5 days on the bicycle, another kid 5, and those that made it would ride the bicycle and those that didn't. You have to teach until the kid learns. So, and that means, teaching means only when you're able to produce the outcomes for the student. Otherwise, it's not teaching. So, how to design instruction that teaches function. This is really important. Because when we teach children to do the things that work under the right kinds of conditions, they'll already know how to do it. It isn't something that's stored in the memory. It's stored in what you need to do at any given time, given the conditions to do it. Then, of course, if you know about these things, like a lot of medicine knows about a lot of things, the thing they lack, and most schools lack, is how do you design a schooling organization so that they don't end up with having to apologize? How do you do it so that you do have the student's performance driving the system? This is about designing contingencies that make organizations work or not work. You can leave it to non-scientific procedures and let it evolve. That's what we've tried. Okay, what am I doing wrong here? Okay, I'm out. Hit again? There we go. I just need to move it forward. I must have hit the, yeah, I got it now. I think I got it. I got it. And how to induce new learning capabilities. Now, this is something we've learned over the last 5 years, and it's really exciting stuff. You know, I recently saw a movie about a coach in an inner city who stopped his basketball team from playing in the finals because they weren't doing well. And so he took them into the library and said, okay, you guys study. So they studied and then they do it. It wouldn't help at that stage because you have to go back up and pick up the pieces. You have to have the capabilities and pace for kids to be able to learn from certain kinds of contact. So we are learning about that. We're learning how to get kids so that they can learn language incidentally. That was a major step for us. Well, I'll do it again. What I'm doing is hitting this keypad. I realize that. All right. Okay, I got it now. So the key to effective application, and this is critical, it's critical. Medicine is critical. Any organization, you're going to make it work. And that's measurement, measurement, measurement. And what's important is what you measure. Not people's attitude about how they feel about it. Not rate this on a semantic differential scale. How did the teacher feel about it? How did the principal feel about it? Did the kid learn? Could they do it given the conditions in which they needed to do it? direct measurement of kids' learning. We measure every response of all of our kids to all instruction across all curricular areas. And we generate about 3 million data points a month. I finally figured out what I'm doing. Doesn't mean I won't continue to do it. So this involves continuous measurement, moment to moment, and we measure the learning, the behavior, the development of children, students. We measure the teaching behavior of teachers, the supervising behavior of supervisors, which is not sitting in your office. And we measure the teacher mentors. I'm a teacher mentor. So in our 27 years at our schools, we measure all the responses of all children to instruction, the children's achievement of educational standards, which is more important than achievement tests, the effectiveness and quality of the teaching, teachers' decisions about the selection of alternative tactics. Remember I said those 200 tactics? You have to know what tactic is needed by a given kid at a given time. What about a kid who can't talk? What about a kid who talks really well, can't read, can't write, has these kinds of conditions? What you do with that particular kid. The effectiveness is the quality of the supervisor interactions with the teachers. If the kid doesn't learn, it's the problem of the supervisor. If the supervisor can't get it, it's the problem of the university program that teaches it. And you have to organize the system so that everybody has a responsibility in that system. The overall performance of the classrooms and entire schools relative to key components of instruction and key learning outcomes. For example, in one of the classes I'm going to talk about, our end of our second grade class, the kids get 16,000 learn units a week. Now you don't know what that is, but I know that's really important. The response units change. So if you don't have that kind of measurement, it's a problem. You've got to wait until the end of the year. What happens with most kids is they get to the third grade before everybody finds out they can't read. Fact. Learning and teaching. People sometimes have a hard time understanding what learning is. I'm going to tell you what it is. Learning is the acquisition of new operands or higher order operands. And that's a technical term, and I won't go into it very much. But it's the learning that's a function of incidental or designed environments. Teaching is the arrangement of conditions such that learning occurs as a function of those arrangements. That if children can't learn incidentally, a teacher is a person and a teaching operation is something that leads the kid to be able to do it because of that intervention. And that's my definition of teaching. If all you have to do is leave the learning on a stump and run, those who already know how to do it and have learned at home will get it. And that's why we continue to have this perennial problem. Teaching occurs when learning is a result of teaching. Operants and higher, what are these? Operants consist of motivational conditions, of the context in which you learn, specific antecedents that occur before, what you see, what you hear, what you taste, all of those things. The actual behaviors, you've always had those behaviors. It's the learning, the antecedents, and the consequence that are what you do. And the consequence. And the consequence is it works. It's called reinforcement. If it doesn't work, it's not going to keep the behavior going. That's true with reading, that's true with math. There are lots of things you have to do, however, to get kids past the difficult part when it's not automatically reinforcing. When you learn that it is in your repertoire. It's not in your memory. It's not stored in an executive function. It's not in your hardcore. All those are great metaphors. That is, given the conditions of having to do it, you will do it. Higher order ones are the types of operants that when you learn one, many others are available without instruction. Remember I talked to you about how to learn, how we know about how to get kids to the stage they can learn in ways they could not. This is an example of that work. Also, then, once you know about that, you have to have a system to make sure it works so that students' responses drive the consequence. Let me say it again. Student responses drive the consequences for everybody in the system. What do you have to do in order to do that? You have to measure student responses. Teachers are strategic scientists. They're not technicians, not people going to just be creative from moment to moment. They have to do what works under certain kinds of conditions. Supervisors have to be more advanced scientists. They can't be people who simply just get a degree, show up, sit in the office. They have to be able to know what to do when a teacher can't get the kids to learn. The teachers are their students, and they are accountable for their students. Administration is driven by measurably accountable conditions. Now we're talking about our schools. Now everybody else is different, right? University courses in our program are based on what works for the students in the schools. They spend a day in the schools, our graduate students, working with kids. They come to class at night. The coursework is related to what they see works in the classroom. So in our case, they train in our program here. So the teacher expertise based on a science. There are 3 tiered levels of board certification. There are 3 levels of supervisor professor certification. There are types of teacher expertise based on functional relationships to students' learning. That is, we know that certain kinds of levels of expertise, kids will learn more. Without that level of expertise, they will not learn as much. So we make sure in the system that those people who are teaching who don't have that expertise are supervised with people with that expertise. Parent education is a key part of our preschool program. That's where I keep saying that health folks, get in here. We get parents who are able to handle difficult children with autism, behavior problems, whatever, so that you don't abuse them. Right? That's the place to teach them about health, right? And we also have preschools where we have wealthy people working with very poor people under conditions where they both got the same problem. It's called a yoke contingency. We're in the boat together, and we are brothers and sisters. Publicly funded. None of this is grant money. None of the hundreds and thousands of hours of data collection and research is based on a grant. If we're good enough for your kids, your school system will bring us in to do it. And the parents will make the board do it. Administration doesn't care. I'm going to show you amazing data. Do you think the administration care? They're worried about job programs. But the parents sure do. So, some programs are privately run, like we started a preschool 27 years ago, but it's publicly funded. We have developed a few little schools, mostly of these for kids with autism, in the USA, in Ireland, in England. And we've been influential in Spain. We have something started in Italy. We have constant involvement with people in Norway. So, Ibadan in Nigeria, schools that create a sense of community. That's the place to go. It's not only churches that create a sense of community. I'm all for churches. But the schools can be cross-cultural, cross-community. Right? Children are a leveler. Young children level everybody. Research base. 65 years of the basic applied science. B.F. Skinner, 1938. Pavlov. Basic stuff. Also, 26 years of Kava systems research. Research applied behavior analysis, many areas. Published in over 25 peer-reviewed journals. Experimental science is the behavior of the individual to teach each individual. Control and experimental groups, which I've done many studies of, are weak for predicting the behavior of individuals or the learning of individuals. In order to do that, you need experimental science of predicting the behavior of individuals. Behavior analysis has developed that. I can tell you, given certain characteristics of a kid, what's probably like to work. If you look at that in experimental control group, and you say, if this kid belongs to this population, it'll probably work. But 13% are going to die, and 13% are going to be super people. The identification of verbal developmental stages. We've actually identified how kids acquire certain kinds of verbal behavior, novel kinds of behavior as a function of experience, and what kinds of experience have to preclude that in order for children to profit from that. So the goal is effective education, not just equality of funds, nor equity of presence of funds. It doesn't matter if you fund people, it doesn't work. People say, well, you get 30 minutes of speech therapy. Well, why? Well, because it's mandated. Well, what's that mean? Does it work? That's what, the only thing America has ever added to the world is they develop a system and say, well, maybe we ought to treat people based on whether something works. We never quite applied it as broadly as we should have. Quality is quantifiable. You know, quality is quantifiable. And I'm lost. And this is Sonali?
No, this is not.
But anyway, somebody's coming by rescue. So quality is quantifiable. Okay? So I don't know what qualitative is versus quantitative. Okay, we're good. All right. So all children, well-to-do homes, poor children, children with disabilities. The reason that we've developed schools all around the world is because well-educated parents of children with autism found out from our research that this stuff works for all kids and came and asked us to do that. The government didn't do that. Parents in Ireland made the government of Ireland do it. Okay? So, one of the first things you need is adequate funding. In many places, we do have adequate funding. It's just going to the wrong place. So funding for our model is the same as regular funding in all school districts that we work in. Children receive free or reduced lunch. We're talking about our kids and other kids. It's not done as well as it should be done. We're not thinking about nutrition the way we should be. Most schools aren't thinking about how do we teach kids to like things that they don't like that are good for them. We know something about that. We have state certified teachers, and they are also trained in our science and board certified. The class size is reasonable. It's the size of the class, ideally determined by the verbal development levels of kids. So if we have kids who don't talk that we get to talk, it might be one-on-one. So I'm going to talk to you about the outcomes for our, what we call our Accelerated Independent Learner model, which is a regular education model that has all kinds of kids in it. And I'm going to show you some data after 2 years. These kids are with us 2 years. What I really want to do is get these kids at 2 years old. And I'm trying to raise some money to do that. Anyway, here are the standardized test scores at the end of second grade in reading, language, and mathematics. And these are the Terra Nova Achievement Test scores. We began with this model in the first grade. They are now in our CABAS AIL third grade. One of 6 first grade classes in this particular public school. And we are now training another teacher to do this too. So here's the composition of the class. This is the way classes ought to look. 23% are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders, whatever that is, and I've probably seen more than anybody in the world. 23% of children from families in which English is not spoken in the home. That's the most difficult group to teach in American education and in the world today. It's starting to happen in Europe too. 35% ethnic minorities, 42% low income, and 23% upper middle class, not minority, not special education, English-speaking families. Okay, and there's a teacher. I won't go through this, I'm going to run out of time. So here's the mean across the class in language, reading, and math. So the students, after 2 years, performed, on average, mean, at the 4.29 of the 4th grade level at the end of 2nd grade. That's across all these kids. That's 2 1/3 grade levels above their actual grade. That's not getting on grade. Okay? They performed in the 84th percentile nationally, meaning they performed better than 83% of the children in the USA, and only 15% of the classes in the USA performed better. The English as second language group. Now remember, this is the most difficult group to teach in the country. You go up to Springfield, Massachusetts. Marla Brazard has a huge study of those kids following for many years. Biggest problem. Kid comes to the country young. He doesn't have very much Spanish, doesn't have any English, can't talk to mom, can't talk. It's difficult. So these kids perform at the 5th grade level across language, reading, and math. One of these little girls, my favorite little girl, 87% nationally. 87% nationally. English second language. Ethnic minorities, mean grade level, 6.23. 4 grades above age level. And we're talking about the Board of Education talking about getting people on grade level. The range is from 3.9 to 7.6. The lowest kid performed a grade, almost 2 grade levels above what they should do. 91st percentile nationally. Now, notice, this is 6th grade. So keep in mind that, there are 4 grade levels above it, but when we get up to the other group, you're going to still see a gap, and I'm going to tell you why I think it is. So here are the low-income students, which is 42% of the class. That's the problem, poverty. Mean performance, 6th grade. 91st, almost 92nd percentile nationally. Autism spectrum disorders, in same class. This is real integration, folks. But these kids couldn't be in that class had they not been prepared to have the learning capabilities to learn from that class. And had we not had the kinds of people trained to work with them to do that. So these are all middle upper income students, families. In fact, they're the reason we're in the public schools, because the families want the model and say, I'm not going to do it unless you give me a regular ed. And so they make the Board of Ed do that. And some of these out of district, they bring in the money and they support, whatever. So the mean performance level of these kids is about 2.97. And if we take out the kid that should have been in there, we later found out didn't have the capabilities and needed other kinds of things, the grade level is about 3rd grade. And the range is from 1.2 to 4.6, 64th percentile. So they're at least on or above grade level. Upper middle class, not minority, not special education. That's the A on the top of your formula. And I think we got A equal B here. 23% of the class, 4 students, and still with us, right? Mean performance, 8.4. 6 grade levels above. Range, 5th to almost the 11th grade. Do you realize how fast we have to keep people going to get the material to these kids? That's where all these kids should be performing. 97th percentile nationally. I'm not going to go through the report. All instruction is based on scientific procedures, which means they're cataloged. Doesn't mean it's based on my personality, somebody else's personality. If people are trained and monitored to do this, and know how to do the procedures at the right time, they're replicable. When teaching is an art, it's up to somebody's individual whatever. When teaching is a science, you can replicate it. So that's the difference between teaching as a science and teaching as a craft. I'm all for anybody taking any approach to education and teaching that they want to take. You can take a qualitative, you can take whatever you want to do. But this needs to be on the table as an alternative too. Okay? A science of teaching. So I have been, as a behaviorist and a person attempting to be a science of teaching, such a small minority in this institution for so many years. But it's changed because it works for the kids. And it's going to change. So all the procedures we use are replicable, including how and when to do them and the measurable quality in using them. So it's a science for teaching and performance. We manage the class so that students love it. They love to come to school. We don't use coercive procedures. In our preschool, kids cry when it's time to go home, and you can guess who those kids are. So the teaching of new operants are the behaviors, the motivational concept. You got to want it. You got to have people in a situation where they want to do it, and they have to teach it so that it's clear to them. You have their attention to get the behavior, and the consequence works. And when you do that, until you can step back, they have it. It's not in their memory. It's not stored in some mystical place. Given the conditions in which they need it, they will do it. So, teaching them to do that, to have those, to do things they could not do before. Finally, to manage the application of these scientific procedures. This is needed so desperately in medicine. You know, my youngest daughter is a pediatrician. She sees this all the time. The biggest problem in medicine is to get people to do what they should do, to get the people in the system to be able to do what they should do without, hey, it's your fault. See, the effect on the patient's health should drive the whole system. Not to eliminate people, but to change the system. So this is what we do in our little schools. So it's a science for curriculum design too. So you have to, based on what we found in about 20 plus years of research of verbal behavior, you need to teach people to write so that they write. The only way it's going to pay off is that if somebody reading it can do what the writer has them do. You teach people to write like that, to talk like that, they write really well. Structure follows function. Teach people to talk that way. Let me tell you, in most middle schools, a lot of schools in this city, kids go around cursing, using bad language. And you know, most people think these kids are bad. You know their problem? They don't have any other language. So this really is shit to them. Do you understand? They have not been taught. Hart and Risley. Impoverished families get 2/3 fewer language. The children get 2/3 fewer interactions in language than well-to-do families. They also miss these verbal developmental cusps. Not because the parents don't care, but they're working 2 jobs and used to be on welfare in that study. And they have more kids, and there just aren't enough people going around to give the interactions. So that kid gets to kindergarten, and they're already, you know, 2/3 behind. The teacher doesn't have a clue how to interact with this kid and can't give them the catch-up things that we give them. Like, for example, I use a second language. They get like 100 extra instructional units a day of learning new words. Last year, Lisa, my favorite little kid in that group, was performing at 6.9 grade level now. And we have all these pictures and things, and she learns the name of them, go through and take on a refrigerator, whatever it is, and she tacks them really fast. And she asked the teacher if she could take it home and use it with her parents. So how in the world, if kids don't know the name of things, see, it's not just they're trying to get, they don't know the name of things. So that has to be fixed. So you have to teach function with structure. So we now know how to induce capabilities that we could not do before. And this is a little hard to explain. So you already have talked about, it's not behavior. When you manage behavior, when you get kids to behave well and do well in your classroom, or your children in your home, or in your church, or wherever you go, that's something they already know how to do. You just have to know how to act to get them to do what they already know how to do. And that's a science. There's a science about it. The second thing is, you can have kids doing that, and then they're trying to learn how to read, and they can't do it. Right? So if you can teach them, if you know the right tactic, to read, unless they do not have the developmental capabilities to do that, either because of native disabilities or because of economic disenfranchisement. Now the reason we found this is because we found lots of kids with native disabilities, and we learned how to get them to get those capabilities. And then we found, lo and behold, that was the problem with the kids from the economically disenfranchised community. They didn't have enough language, and they didn't have the experiences that allowed them to build on that. And once we did that, we could make progress. So these are what we call developmental levels. A developmental level means, a behavioral developmental level, means that it's a behavior that's tedious, subtle, often difficult to acquire. Once acquired, an individual can do things they could not do before, and they can learn things they could not do before. For example, before a child walks, they just don't come into contact with many things. They're not going to learn about those things. Once they learn how to walk, they come in contact with lots of other things that they learn about incidentally. They also become capable of running, skipping, other developmental possibilities become apparent. So we've identified certain stages, and we can get children through certain levels of development, which allows us to teach them in ways they could not learn before, indirectly, and to teach them new developmental customs. So the other thing is they acquire the foundations of observing that accelerate rates of learning. For example, one of the big reasons that children often have difficulty learning to talk is the voice is not a conditioned reinforcer for them. It typically happens in utero and shortly after infancy. But that can not happen for various reasons. And when that's missing, you can go back and induce that with certain kinds of Pavlovian pairing procedures. So if looking at, here's one, for example, that's really a boggler. We already know from years and years of descriptive research that the more books in a home, right, the more likely the children are to read well and do well, right? Everybody heard of that? Well, here's the source. If you take little kids, and the first study was done with Mandarin Chinese children, so I think it doesn't matter. And if you condition, that is, you use a procedure called pairing that conditions the book so that the kids will go in a play area and choose to look at books long before they can read. I've done this thousands of times. You go in our school and the kids go in the play area, they got toys, they got everything, they'll pick up a book. And I'll turn the pages. It's a conditioned reinforcer. One of the major parts of learning is to get conditioned reinforcers. The problem with addiction is the lack of conditioned reinforcers. The more conditioned reinforcers you have that offset addiction, better off you are. Addiction is there because they're unconditioned reinforcers. Very easy. Sugar is an unconditioned reinforcer. Right? Heroin's an unconditioned reinforcer. Books are a conditioned reinforcer. There's music. The level of that compared to what? You have to learn something. So you have to have these foundations of observing responses to even know there's anybody in the room. Ever see a kid that somebody walks in the room, they don't even know they're there? Okay. All right. If you get kids to look at books so they want to do it, they'll do it in free time, and we can do that reliably. Have been doing it for years. They will learn to read 2 to 4 times faster because they're already looking at it. Same thing goes with voices. If voices are conditioned reinforcers, you can teach kids to discriminate as a listener and to begin to speak much faster. Same thing with music. If you get a kind of music that's conditioned reinforced, I did 10 years of research on that, the kid can learn how to play and discriminate 4 times faster. So that's a prerequisite. That's a real empirical definition of readiness to learn. You don't have to wait till the little weeds grow. Right? You can make the development. You see? Like, for years, Anna Lieberman here said, you have to wait for kids to read in 1st grade. Turns out the stuff she was talking about, infants have. Infants discriminate from this. Don't wait. The weeds come in quick. Individualization. Everything we do is individualized until we teach kids that they're bad teacher proof. At that point, they monitor their own behavior. By the 2nd grade, they monitor their own behavior. They graph their own behavior. And eventually, they're going to have to just have people talk and they'll learn. So this is our system, which doesn't show up here. And I'm really sorry, but this happens all the time. Same thing happens in India. This doesn't even look like it's Hindu, does it? Anyway, at the top, you can't see it. This is our organizational chart. Who usually sits at the top? Obama, Hillary, whoever it is, they always sit at the top. Students. Okay, everybody says I'm a child-centered approach. How do you get to be a child-centered approach? You have to measure every response and graph it. You have to graph it. You have to put it on the board so that every day a parent can come in and say, oh, my child met this standard. Well, they didn't meet this standard. Or my child stopped chewing on Charlie They started paying attention. Okay? Now, how are you going to do that? That would be true in medicine. I mean, part of the problem is how they organize it. Why is it, is it getting better or is it getting worse? And why is that? It's not the doctor's problem, it's the doctor's problem because of the system. Anyway, curriculum, always measured across all categories. And then the next part of our system are teachers, parents, and these are teacher trainers over here. So these parents, we have an educational system to teach them how to teach their kids to behave well and to also learn some new things. How to toilet train your kid. How to teach you. Why does your child go in the corner and do stereotyping? Well, because he doesn't have any conditional reinforcers. You don't want to stop the behavior. You want to change the environment. All the behaviors we need in our entire life, we have when we're born. It's the antecedents, the consequence, the control of what we call education. Okay. Then the teachers. We have a multi-tiered system. The teachers in our school that don't go through our university system go through the same thing. It just takes them about 20 years. Teacher supervisors are responsible for the teachers. The teacher trainers are also responsible for the parent education. The parents come to the school, they take part, they're trained to work with their own child by working with other children, and they can do that, and then they go back and work with their own child. Then we have this Commons board here, which gets together from 3 or 4 universities that monitors the system, and myself and several of the people in the university go around and continuously monitor the data. For example, I have the data from all the kids in all the universities, all the schools. And then the university is supposed to be driven by that. But you can't just say, well, I'm child-centered, unless the measurement comes in every day. It says, well, it's like the scale. If you have to go in and look at that scale every day, it'll make a difference. And I know they tell you, only look once a week. It doesn't matter. You get on that scale every day. You do that every day at a certain time, and you'll take care of your weight problem. Every day now. What if you're in a system where you have to? You can't go to the bathroom unless you have to step on the scales. That's going to drive what you do. And the thing that has to drive, not standardized tested in you, that's okay. I'm in a mirror blueberry, that's good. We can't go a week without catching these problems. Right? It's the end. I have to go. I have a lot of data, but there's a book. Right? The first one is online. The second one is about these verbal capabilities. It's very complicated. You probably wouldn't, find a lot of it, but it's very interesting, and it's helped us make a huge difference. The first book is about our system, and that system can be used across medical. It can be used in many ways. Westinghouse, which is an organization that used to exist, tried to buy it in the 1980s, but instead we had enough refrigerators and we had too few kids who knew what to do. Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
The preceding program was brought to you by Teachers College, Columbia University. Please visit us online at itunes.tc.columbia.edu.